My name is Gina, and I came into this world, it seems, as a delayed thought. My first memories began to form when I was already around 4 years old. By that time, my older sisters, Bella and Laura, were already teenagers. Bella, who had been born 12 years before me, was the epitome of perfection in the eyes of everyone, from our parents to the neighbors. She was always an honor student, stood out in school, and her successes at home were the main topic of conversation. And then there was Laura, Bella's younger sister, born 10 years after me, who also made an impression from the start. At 15, she joined the cheerleading team, and even received a special award at the school graduation. They were beautiful, confident, and always surrounded by attention. As for me, sitting quietly in a corner like an invisible observer, I watched this from the sidelines, in my quiet little corner. Mom and Dad often discussed their achievements, talked about important events in their lives, while I sat at the table, pushing peas around my plate until they finished their conversations. With each passing year, it became clearer to me that there would always be someone more important than I was in this house. All the talks, all the achievements, their lives were like an open book, and I felt like nothing more than a shadow flitting across its pages. Time passed, and it seemed natural for everyone that Bella remained the perfect student, Laura the leader, and me? I was just there, unnoticed. I remember the day Bella brought her first boyfriend home. She was 16, and she was glowing, as always. I was just a 4-year-old hiding behind the banister. The guy was tall, with messy hair, nervously shaking hands with our father. He was something entirely different from me. They were all so grown up, so confident. And they were always together, as though I could never be part of their world. As time passed, Laura also began to date someone. At 15, she was already beginning to build her life, attending high school, while I sat in my room listening to conversations that didn't concern me. College applications, choosing graduation dresses, all of this was for them, and I had no choice but to sit on the sidelines and wait for it to be over. I learned to be independent. In a house where there were always so many people and so much talk, I sought solitude. I learned not to demand attention, not to ask for it. All that was left was to watch the world spin around me, as if I were no more than a shadow. But those shadows always made their presence felt. When I was 7, I remember the morning when Mom rushed into the kitchen with the joyful news that Bella had been accepted into Northwestern University. That moment was followed by celebratory pancakes, happy smiles, but I sat in my usual place as if I didn't belong in this world. Mom was happy, Dad was proud, and I was just there, as always, in the shadow. When Laura went off to college 2 years later, the house became quieter. The silence that can sometimes be deafening. But at the same time, this house was still full of their presents, their trophies, their photographs. They left behind traces, as if this house were their eternal monument. I searched for my corner, my own world in this one, where their voices and successes echoed in every corner. I learned not to notice how every conversation inevitably came back to them. But the real turning point came when I was 15. At that moment, Bella, now married and living on the other side of the city, brought home her first child. The boy, Marco, became a part of their life, and the whole family immersed themselves in this new world. My parents were overjoyed, as if life was beginning to follow new rules. I sat among them, absorbing their joy, as always, quiet, unnoticed. Mom, squeezing my shoulder, whispered, "You're going to be such wonderful grandmothers and grandfathers." I didn't know how to say it, but suddenly something familiar echoed in my head. They're happy again, and I'm still here. Looking back, I understand that it was at that moment that everything began to change. With each day, with each event, with each new step from Bella and Laura, I became more and more estranged. But there was something about it. For so long, I had tried to find my place in their world, and now it was time to think about how to create my own. Although I couldn't have known it then, I was truly happy to have become an aunt. Marco was adorable, with his big brown eyes, his recent teeth, and his restless nature. He was the living embodiment of childhood, free from all the worries that would eventually come with it. I liked making faces at him when he sat on my lap, while Bella and Mom chatted over coffee in the kitchen. I immersed myself in his world, pure and carefree, like a blank canvas, with no place for tough questions or long reflections. But, as often happens in life, this dynamic changed faster than I could have imagined. It all began with what seemed like an innocent request, which entered our lives as a minor detail, leaving no trace. One Saturday morning, Bella asked, "Gina, could you watch Marco for a couple of hours? I really need to go buy something." She had already thrown her purse over her shoulder, and before I could respond, she handed me her son. "Thanks, sis, you're the best," she said, and without pausing, disappeared out the door. I sat with Marco, his small hands grabbing my fingers, and suddenly it seemed like this would always be the way things were. I liked him. He was simple, sincere, and in his world, there were no complex problems. But this became the new normal. Every weekend, Bella would show up at our parents' house, hand me Marco, and disappear as if she were part of another reality for a few hours. Shopping, lunch with friends, a day at the spa, this was her way of taking a break from motherhood, which she seemed to perceive as so exhausting that she needed me time every time. Meanwhile, I sat with the child, who, despite his liveliness and mischief, was a heavy burden for me. Sometimes she would disappear for 5 hours, and I began to lose my patience. One day, I complained to Mom when Bella hadn't returned, and I started to worry that my own plans for the day were falling apart. I was supposed to meet Jenny at the mall. Mom barely lifted her eyes from the magazine and, with a completely calm expression, said, "Family helps family, Gina. Your sister needs time for herself. You'll understand when you become a mom." And there was something distant, almost cruel, in those words. As if I couldn't claim the right to personal time because I wasn't a mother, I wasn't someone who required understanding. I was just the younger sister, and everything was supposed to be done according to their convenience. I was 16 when Laura announced she was pregnant. She was 10 years older than me, but in our parents' eyes, she had always been the one who stood out. And now, when she shared the news at the family dinner, everyone clinked their glasses in joy and celebrated. I, however, felt something heavy tighten around my heart, like a knot in my stomach that I couldn't untie. Of course, when Sophie was born, everything repeated itself, but on an even larger scale. Now my weekends turned into a circus of management. I was watching over 2 kids at once, helping to build towers from blocks, soothing a crying baby, and while one slept, the other would start drawing on the furniture. It was everything, but not what I imagined when I thought of rest. Once, when I was talking to Dad, tossing Sophie up on his hip, he remarked, "Well, you should have thought about this before agreeing to watch the kids." His voice carried a hidden tone of reproach, as if I had made a mistake by trying to help my sisters. When I expressed my frustration, Sophie started crying, and Mom, from the kitchen, snapped, "Quiet, you're upsetting the baby." I looked at her figure, barely visible through the doorframe, and felt how the word selfish pierced through my feelings. But who, if not me, deserved even a little space for myself? I started spending more time in the school library. I became engrossed in my studies, searching for new horizons. It mattered to me, everything I could control were my grades. And that was my ticket to a world where I could be myself. Every A on my report card felt like a step toward freedom. And then, finally, the letter from Berkeley arrived, the coveted acceptance letter, along with a partial scholarship. I felt pride and relief swelling in my chest, as though I were the one making the decision about where to go, rather than being left in the shadows. But my success was met with resistance. "There's a great business program at the local community college," Bella began during a family meeting, which had been unexpectedly arranged to discuss my future. Everyone was there: Mom, Dad, Laura, Grandma Rose. They all stood on one side, as if it were the natural continuation of our shared path. "You could study at home, save money, and help with the kids," Laura continued cheerfully, as though this were a tempting offer for me. I looked at their faces. They were all watching me carefully, waiting for my response, as though I were not part of this family, but just a tool for their plans. I felt their gazes penetrate me, like foreign, almost invisible ties that I couldn't break. The family meeting ended with my parents and sisters throwing disappointed looks my way, but I didn't care. For the first time in many years, I felt like I could clearly see my future, and it didn't involve being a free babysitter for everyone. College life was everything I had dreamed of, and more. My dorm room became my sanctuary, a place where I could be myself, without others' expectations, without the need to serve anyone. My classmates became real friends, with whom I could laugh, discuss books and movies, and dream about the future. And most importantly, for the first time in many years, my weekends became mine. No crying babies, no toddlers with sticky fingers, just me and my choices. But, of course, you can't completely avoid family obligations, especially during the holidays. I tried to visit them as little as possible, except for Thanksgiving and Christmas, which were non-negotiable. Mom would call a few weeks before the holidays, her voice always hoarse with anticipation. "Everyone's asking about you, Gina," she'd say. "The kids miss Aunt Gina." And despite all my efforts to avoid these gatherings, I still knew I couldn't just ignore them. The first Christmas break after I entered college was complete chaos. Bella now had 2 sons, Marco and his newborn brother Salvatore. Laura had managed to add a boy named Max to her family, along with the now-grown Sophie. But that wasn't all. As soon as I entered the house, I immediately heard a loud "Gina." And at that moment, all eyes were on me. Dorothea, Laura's older sister, along with the 5-year-old twins, stared at me. "The kids are asking about you." No, didn't I think they barely knew who I was? But before I could object, 7-year-old Rachel, my cousin's daughter, latched onto my leg, followed by the 9-year-old son and the 6-year-old daughter of my cousin Mike. "Sweet Mom," someone from the kitchen yelled, barely audible through the mountain of dishes. "Why don't you take the kids upstairs to your room?" And so, gritting my teeth, I hauled 8 kids upstairs, feeling more like a shepherd than a college student. My old bedroom, once a cozy and personal space, had turned into a war zone. Toys were everywhere, juice spilled on the bedspread of my childhood bed, and mysterious chalk marks had appeared on the walls. I barely managed to close the door behind the kids when I heard my stomach growl from hunger. The smells from the kitchen grew more and more tempting, where the adults were enjoying a peaceful holiday meal. As always, was in the background, as though in another world. When Mom finally appeared with a plate of kids' snacks she had barely managed to prepare, I was only able to go downstairs at 8 o'clock, after arranging for several parents to pick up their exhausted children. The dining room was empty, except for a mountain of dirty dishes and scattered serving platters. "Oh, Gina," Laura exclaimed, already putting on her coat. "Max was an angel for you, wasn't he?" she asked, with a hint of sarcasm in her voice. "We need to hurry, he's about to fall asleep." Bella followed her lead. As she gathered her boys, she chatted with Mom about plans for New Year's, seemingly no longer noticing me. Dorothea was helping her twins put on their winter boots, and cousins Rachel and Mike were carrying their sleeping children to the cars. I stood in the corner, feeling all my energy drain away, as their absence became even more palpable than their presence. There wasn't a single word of thanks, not one question about whether I had eaten, as though I weren't part of this family, but just its backdrop. No one turned around when they all left, leaving me among the remnants of the Christmas dinner that I hadn't had the chance to truly enjoy. "Gina, be a dear and help me with these dishes," Mom called from the kitchen, as if I hadn't just spent the entire day doing her a huge favor. I looked at the mountain of dirty plates and serving dishes, evidence of a celebration that seemed to be for everyone except me. It all reminded me that I had never found my own place in this family, a role where I could be myself, and not just the one who solved everyone else's problems. The message from Mom came during finals week, just as I was finishing my last paper for the semester. My phone buzzed with her usual pre-holiday news, but this time, the words sent a chill down my spine. "Bella and Laura are coming with the kids," I read cheerfully. "Plus Dorothea and her twins, the girls, Alessa, Mike, the kids, and exciting news. Bella's daughter-in-law, Lisa, is joining us with her 3 kids. It's going to be such a wonderful Christmas with all these little ones." I did the math in my head, 12 kids. 12, I sat in the library, staring at my phone until the screen went dark. Then I put it down again to make sure I had read it right. The message stayed the same, but something inside me had finally shifted. 2 years in college gave me a perspective I hadn't noticed before. I watched as my roommate Kate went home for the holidays and returned with stories about a real family, time spent playing board games, having movie nights, enjoying actual Christmas dinners. My friend Jessica complained the most when she returned home about having to share the TV remote with her siblings, while I spent all my adult life holidays as an unpaid babysitter. I didn't respond to Mom's message. Instead, I packed my bag for the Christmas holidays with an unusual sense of calm. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the holidays because I was going home with a plan. The days leading up to Christmas were deceptively ordinary. I helped Mom in the kitchen, inhaling the familiar scents of her signature dishes, honey braised meat, glazed ham, and her famous apple pie. I decorated the Christmas tree, carefully hanging ornaments on the sides, creating the skull display next to the quirky glass baubles that Mom saved for the front of the tree. It was all just like before, but at the same time, different. The sense of familiar routine was deceptive. Something inside me had changed, and I knew I wasn't the same person I was a few years ago. Christmas arrived with a flurry of activity. Cars began pulling up to our house one after another, each bringing more chaos than the last. First, Bella arrived with her boys, now 5, and 3 others followed. Laura with Sophie and Max. Lisa, Bella's daughter-in-law, showed up with her 3 kids, all under 7. The rest of the relatives flooded in, and each family added more kids to the growing crowd. I watched from the corner of the living room as the noise level slowly rose. Bella confidently walked toward me, her youngest balanced on her hip, while the older one tugged at her sleeve. "Gina," she called, that familiar tone that meant she was about to pass off her parenting duties. "The boys are so excited to see you, they can't wait to play with their favorite aunt." She was already nudging them toward me, just as she'd always done. In the past, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but this time, everything felt different. This time, I stood still and looked her directly in the eye. She fell silent, noticing the change in my gaze. "No," I said. "I'm not watching the kids today. I'm here to enjoy Christmas, just like everyone else." It was said without a hint of doubt, and although confusion flashed in her eyes, she didn't have time to respond. The boys, looking puzzled, froze. I knew that, as always, she was used to my role, but this time, I chose to just be a part of this day. I wasn't going to be the one to raise their children, their noisy, restless little ones. I was tired. Tired of having my life always be part of someone else's script. Now, I was at the center of my own story, and Christmas was going to be just that, my holiday, my time. Mom approached, as always, with a gentle reproach in her voice. "Gina, you're not going to leave the kids without attention, are you?" I felt the subtle tension in her words, but I responded calmly, "Today, I'm just going to be here, Mom." It's amazing how much meaning can be packed into a single sentence, so much struggle and a decision that brooked no doubt. I knew that this day was a step toward a new life, a new Gina. The room wasn't silent, there were just too many kids. Their voices, laughter, running, and even crying filled every crack in the air, every corner of the space, making it so thick and charged that I could literally feel the weight of the chaotic atmosphere. But what surprised me was how the adults reacted to it. I could see the shock wave ripple across their faces, and everything around me seemed to freeze for a moment before the familiar exclamations and almost panicked chaos returned. Bella's mouth dropped open, and Mom stood frozen in the doorway with a plate of freshly baked cookies, unsure of what to do with the overwhelming flood of children. Dad glanced up from his newspaper, raising his eyebrows. "But who's going to watch all the kids?" Laura's panicked voice echoed across the living room. It made me almost laugh. I turned toward the stairs, pausing long enough to catch the helpless shrug of my mom's shoulders and the puzzled expressions on everyone's faces. The scene was almost comical, and I thought they looked like someone had just told them that Christmas had been canceled. My legs carried me upstairs, up the familiar stairs, past family photos showcasing my sister's many accomplishments, and into my childhood bedroom. The soft click of the door closing behind me felt like the period at the end of a very long sentence. I flopped onto my bed, the same double bed that had been there since middle school, and let out a deep sigh. Below, I could hear the muffled sounds of chaos, the adults' voices rising and falling, children crying, occasional thuds from something being dropped or thrown. Someone was clearly trying to do things their way, while others were losing patience. And in that moment, I felt incredibly calm. For once, I didn't have to be a part of this world, didn't have to be the one who had to control everything. Can you believe she was that selfish? Snippets of conversations that filtered through the floor made me smile. Let them talk, let them finally face reality, by watching their own kids. My phone vibrated with a new message. It was Kate. Did you do it? Did you finally stand up for yourself? Her text was full of excitement. Operation Freedom was in full swing. I typed my response slowly. I'm hiding in my room while they figure out how to be parents to their own kids. I was just about to send the text when a knock on the door interrupted my attempt to hide behind the words. Gina. Mom's voice tried to sound concerned, but there was something between irritation and desperation in it. The kids are asking for you. I didn't move from my comfortable position on the bed, didn't even try to look any different. I was there, in my room, with my phone in hand, and for the first time, it felt like I actually belonged to myself. Mom sighed, her sigh was audible through the door, and then I heard her footsteps retreating down the hall. I went back to my phone and joined the group chat with my college friends. They were discussing their own Christmas dramas. Jessica's uncle had gotten drunk again. Mike's grandmother was asking when he would find a nice girl. Kate's brother had brought home a surprise girlfriend. And all of this gave the sense of a real holiday, one that had always been so far from me. 2 hours passed in the world of their peaceful rebellion. My phone buzzed constantly with supportive messages from friends who had heard me complain about the holiday babysitting duties, a long-standing obligation that turned Christmas into chaos, not a celebration. The chaos downstairs had finally quieted. The strange rhythm that didn't involve me took over. When I finally made my way down the stairs for dinner, it was as if I had risen from the dead. I had been missing from the center of this world for far too long. The expressions on everyone's faces seemed frozen. Aunt Dorothea actually dropped her fork, and Cousin Alessa's mouth was left open mid-sentence. For several seconds, everyone stood still, and I felt the weight of their expectation. In their eyes, I saw silent surprise, as if I had returned not just after a short absence, but after something far more significant. I surveyed the dining room, almost as if bidding farewell to the moment, to that strange, slightly ominous feeling of being back here, among these people. Looking down at the table, I noticed Laura's absence. I didn't see her anywhere near, which was unusual, given that she was usually at the center of everything. Through the doorway to the living room, I could see her trying to organize some game with the kids. Her usually well-groomed hair had fallen out of its elegant hairstyle, and there was a stain of unknown origin on her festive sweater, which unintentionally drew all my attention. I sat at the adults' table for the first time in a long while. I surveyed the food spread before me. Everything was still hot, fresher than ever, still waiting for me to enjoy it. No warm leftovers, no half-eaten kids' portions, no scraps. Pure luxury, and it seemed to have been specially prepared so that I wouldn't notice any absurdity around me, so that I would simply eat, forgetting everything else. I felt the weight of disapproving glances as I filled my plate, with Mom's glazed ham, Aunt Dorothea's sweet potato casserole, and Cousin Alessa's famous green bean dish. The clinking of silverware on plates couldn't completely mask the tension in the room. I was halfway through enjoying my first real holiday meal in years when Bella finally lost it. She watched me eat with such intensity, the kind of gaze that's usually reserved for nature documentaries about predators and their prey. "Well," she said with a smirk, "looks like someone's gotten a bit too big for her college shoes. Seems like she's completely forgotten about sisterly duties." I didn't rush with my spoonful of mashed potatoes, deliberately licking it clean before responding. I had always felt her eyes boring into me, as if I were supposed to be exactly who she wanted me to be. And maybe, at this moment, it would have been easy to give in, to let her jabs slide, to let her feel victorious. But I wasn't in a hurry. The food was truly excellent when eaten fresh, and that was so important that I almost forgot her words. But still, as much as I wanted to delay this moment, I knew I had to respond. "Sisterly duties?" I replied, trying to keep my voice even and calm. "I don't recall seeing any free nanny service in the sisterhood manual. Perhaps you could point me to that chapter right after the one where parents are supposed to look after their own children?" The sighs around the table would have been comical if they weren't so sincere. Aunt Dorothea was actually clutching her pearls as if that could somehow steady her inner calm. I didn't know people really did that outside of movies. Cousin Alessa suddenly became very interested in her green bean dish, and Uncle Mike seemed to be trying to disappear into his dinner roll. All the adults were in some strange state, as if their attention was split between what was happening at the table and what was happening in their own minds. Mom and Dad exchanged that special look, the one that meant they were disappointed but didn't want to make a scene. Dad's fork was suspended halfway to his mouth, and Mom's smile had faded at the edges. She was looking at me with that expression, the one you usually see on someone who has known the consequences are inevitable for a long time, but is still trying to avoid them. But instead of the lecture I expected, Mom cleared her throat and asked Uncle Mike about his new job. The conversation came alive again, though everyone still threw glances in my direction, as if they were waiting for me to give in and come back to my old role. I just kept eating, savoring each bite that hadn't been touched by little hands or frozen before I could change diapers. My plate was as clean as my hands, and I felt like I was controlling this moment, like I had the right to enjoy it even in this foggy atmosphere where everything was, but at the same time nothing was. My freedom, my independence, my ability to remain myself amidst all these masks, that's what I felt. And in that tiny moment, I knew no one could knock me off course. About 20 minutes into dinner, Laura appeared in the doorway, looking as if she'd just come from a war. Her Christmas sweater was hopelessly stained. It now sported not only the juice stains from earlier but something dark and sticky, clearly of unknown origin. Her hair, which she had always so proudly styled into an elegant updo, now looked completely disheveled, as if it hadn't survived the mildest of the evening's trials. She entered the room, tired and exhausted, as if the world that had just existed in this house was slowly falling apart around her. Bella, hearing the noise, looked up and, with some strange mixed emotion, began to approach her. "Laura, could you?" She started, with a hint of desperation in her voice, but didn't finish her sentence. I noticed Bella cast one last scathing glance at me before moving away from the table. The sisters switched places, and Laura practically collapsed into the vacated chair, sagging as though she had just gotten up from a battlefield. Her face carried a deep exhaustion, one I could immediately recognize as the result of holding it together for so long. There was something hopeless in that fatigue, as if life had momentarily evaporated, leaving only the traces of storms she had weathered. Laura mechanically began to fill her plate, but even so, she couldn't help but sneak glances at me between bites. It was clear she was struggling. A mix of fear, guilt, and disappointment swirled in her eyes, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of it pressing down. I met her gaze and shrugged, as if responding to an unspoken question. But I just kept enjoying my dinner, as if none of this conversation had anything to do with me. The food was delicious, and for at least a moment, I could forget what was happening around me. Besides, the meal was ending with Mom's favorite apple pie, a luxury I hadn't been able to enjoy before. This moment wasn't just a feast, it was a quiet pleasure, the kind that came from finally being here, unburdened by others' expectations. When I finished, I quietly excused myself and stood up from the table. There was no drama, no protests, no demands. Everyone was silent, and at some point, I realized no one was going to stop me. I left the dining room, not waiting for the conversation to end, not keeping track of every movement. The living room was calm. Morning light filtered through the windows, but even that light couldn't illuminate the darkness that had crept inside me. I descended the stairs, still under the impression of my peaceful Christmas evening, but that feeling evaporated the moment I saw them, Mom, Dad, Bella, and Laura, sitting in an unmistakable ambush. Bella didn't waste any time. Her voice was firm and cold, her words sharpened like arrows. What was that little performance you cut off with your voice yesterday? Is the mere sound of a glass breaking enough to make us look like bad parents in front of everyone? I sank into an armchair, feeling a strange calm that seemed the opposite of everything happening around me. Quietly, with a clarity that surprised me, I said, "You mean, I just want to enjoy Christmas like everyone else? I'm just tired of being the free, misunderstood babysitter while everyone else gets to enjoy the real holiday." "But you've never complained before." Mom furrowed her brow in confusion, and I couldn't help but laugh. I heard her gaze. "Never complained?" I repeated sarcastically. "I've been complaining for years, Mom, but it was so convenient to ignore me. Isn't it a little too easy to keep exploiting the good little sister who never makes a fuss?" And then they started. Everyone spoke at once. The voices merged into a loud wave of accusations, with different phrases but the same meaning: sisterly duty, family responsibilities. The words fell like snow on a roof, and in that moment, I realized I didn't care. I didn't have to play this game. I didn't have to be the person they wanted me to be. I let them exhaust themselves without entering into debate, and finally, I spoke calmly. "They're not my children." I didn't shout. My voice was quiet but firm. I didn't give birth to them. I didn't make the decision to have them. That's your responsibility, not mine. Especially during the holidays, when I should be able to relax too. And then Bella, with all her ambitions and plans, played what she thought was her trump card. She stood up, her face flushed with anger. "Well, maybe it's time someone taught you a lesson in gratitude. Let's see how you manage without Mom and Dad paying for your college." The room fell silent, and I felt all eyes turn to me. Mom and Dad exchanged uncertain glances, clearly taken aback by the suggestion. But instead of the panic Bella clearly expected to see on my face, I felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, all the cards were on the table. I stood up. "Actually, Bella, Grandma has been slowly paying for my education from Grandpa's educational fund, which he set up for all his granddaughters. The same fund that helped you finish nursing school and helped Laura with business school. And even if that weren't the case, would still have a partial scholarship. Plus, unlike some people, I'm not afraid to work to support myself." Without waiting for their response, I turned and went upstairs. It took me less than 10 minutes to pack my things. Over the years, I had learned to travel light, preferring to leave behind only the essentials and not too many memories of the past. I packed my bag quickly, without rushing, but with determination, as if each movement was part of a ritual leading me into a new life, wherever it might take me. Not everything I was leaving behind was unpleasant, but at that moment, it became clear to me that time was gone, and I wasn't going to try to get it back. When I returned to the living room, I heard my parents calling me. Their words, filled with anger and panic, no longer held the weight they once did. I couldn't stay in this house anymore, in this space that, despite all their efforts, could never be mine. Leaving the table, I let the front door slam behind me without even looking back at those who were still arguing and trying to bring me back to their side. Their protests were empty, and I heard them like a distant song that could no longer threaten me. The winter air stung my cheeks sharply, but I barely felt it against the backdrop of what was going on inside me. In the car, on the way to campus, I didn't want to think. I just drove, listening to the silence, and my thoughts seemed to dissolve into the void I had created for myself. Returning to the dorm was strangely peaceful, as if the world had stopped existing, leaving me entirely alone. There were no demands, no expectations, just a space that belonged to me, only to me. I hadn't expected to miss home. But in this new rhythm of life, full of studying in my own silence, I felt something inevitable, the beginning of a new chapter in my life. January passed in a haze of new classes, deep conversations with friends, and rare but infinitely pleasant weekends when I could simply allow myself to be. February brought snow, and with it came the fragrant absence of family drama. At some point, I realized that for the first time in many years, I was truly living my own life, not existing on the sidelines of someone else's. But one cold Saturday morning, at the end of February, when the world outside was wrapped in a snowy blanket, I looked out the window and saw them, Mom, Dad, and Laura, standing in the parking lot. Their figures stood out against the bustling students rushing to and from classes, but they seemed so out of place here, among this crowd. Their bodies were stiff, like people who had been traveling for too long and didn't know how to stand. My first instinct was simple: pretend I wasn't home, hide, leave. But something in their body language made me stop. They looked different, less like parents and more like people who had realized their mistake. And so, without hesitation, I went downstairs to meet them in the lobby. Laura spoke first, with an unusual warmth in her voice. "Could we buy you a coffee? We'd like to talk." I nodded, and we headed to the cafe, where the morning light gently filtered through the windows, and steam rose from our cups like thoughts slowly filling the space. We sat at a corner table. The silence between us was unusually heavy with unspoken words. Mom broke the silence first, nervously tracing her fingers along the edge of her cup. "After you left, we did a lot of thinking." Her voice sounded uncertain. Laura quietly added, "We thought a lot. We were wrong, Gina. We used you for years, calling it family duty, when in reality, we were just looking for an excuse to feel better about ourselves." Dad cleared his throat. "We didn't understand, or maybe we didn't want to understand, how unfair this was. You deserve your holidays, your time, to be treated like an adult, not like a nanny in our family." These words struck me, but I couldn't yet fully embrace them. I took a big sip of coffee to hide my reaction, but their sincerity couldn't leave me indifferent. "What about Bella?" I asked, finally looking at Laura. The same sigh as before, when Laura said, "She still doesn't get it, you know what she's like." It's hard for her to admit she was wrong. But the rest of us, we want to do better. Mom added, "I won't make you take care of the kids when you come home anymore. We won't expect you to give up your holidays for us. We want you to come home because you want to, not because you need to save us." I studied their faces, feeling how deeply I was absorbing their words. In Mom's eyes was sincerity, in Dad's face, regret, and in Laura's posture, openness. It felt like, for the first time in many years, I was looking at my parents and seeing them not just as figures of authority and obligation, but as people who, perhaps, had finally begun to understand. "Okay," I said quietly. And in that moment, despite years of silence and disagreement, I understood that anything was possible. Perhaps only now, after I had come back to myself, could I allow myself to return to them. That evening, after they left, I unlocked their numbers, and within minutes, I received a message from Laura. "I miss you, sis, this time for real." And though the process had been long and difficult, I felt that I had finally found my way home.